Heyo, I'm Oranim. Recently, I finished playing through a little game that you may have heard of, Hollow Knight Silksong, and I had a fantastic time with it. I loved the gorgeous art and music, the flowy acrobatic combats, and the tight boss designs. That said though, I did have some issues along the way, and after reading lots of YouTube comments, Steam reviews, and posts on Blue Sky, I realized I'm not the only one. I think RT Game put it pretty well by describing the game as, quote, like eating an amazing chocolate cake that randomly has sand in it. Now, even though I'm not a huge gamer, I do like a hard game from time to time. Some of my favorites are Celeste, Rainworld, and of course Hollow Knight. But, like I said, I'm pretty casual about playing games, and I don't have hours and hours every day to dedicate to it. Or like 1 to 2 hours each day. Because of this, when I play a hard game, I usually want to feel like it's valuing my time as a player. Like every minute I spend with the game is time well spent. With that said, I wanted to explore some ways to tweak Silksong so that it feels a bit more enjoyable to a more casual player like myself, where my time is a bit more limited. I wanted to make very small suggestions though, so that Team Cherry's intended experience isn't altered that much. They have a very specific vision for the game, and that really comes through, so I want to preserve that as much as possible. Difficulty and all. This video is just a thought exercise to have a discussion around Silksong and game design in general, just for fun. So if you have any ideas of your own, I'd love to read them in the comments. Just in case it needs saying though, this video will have spoilers for Act 1 and Act 2. If you're still playing through the game and don't want to be spoiled, please watch this video later. While playing through the game, I was pretty hesitant to use my red tools. As you can probably guess, this is because red tools are crafted using their own currency called shell shards that are dropped by defeating enemies. I've seen some mixed opinions on this as a mechanic. It can lead to needless grinding when you run out of them, or in my case, not using red tools at all during boss fights. This is because I didn't want to become dependent on them while learning the boss's patterns, to where I wouldn't be able to beat the boss without them. If I had decided to use red tools and ran out of shell shards during my boss attempts, I would have had to stop what I was doing and go grind for shell shards. And yeah, I've read that this is how some folks had to go about it. The alternative to grinding though, is to go do something else, which is likely what Team Cherry intended, as exploration leads to upgrades, which leads to smoother boss fights. I do respect that as a design choice, but at the same time, I feel that as more tools and tool slots are unlocked, the scaling of the shell shard cap doesn't quite match up with the pace at which they'll be used in the mid to late game. There were times where I'd go through 50, 70, even 100 shell shards worth of tools in one encounter. So because of this, I'd probably add another benefit to crafting kits, where they decrease the amount of shell shards needed to craft new tools. Not a huge amount though, something small like 10 or 20%. This goes in line with the tool pouches unlocking higher caps for shell shards and red tools. One benefit to your economy, and one benefit to your combat capabilities. So it feels right to me to add an economy benefit to the crafting kits, which don't have one currently. It's not much, but I think it would allow red tools to be used just a bit more freely, without as much potential for grinding. Now on to a more tricky topic, the damage scaling. In my opinion, tiny enemies and hazards should not deal 2 masks of damage, ever. I'm pretty okay with bosses and bigger enemies dealing 2 masks of damage, but small mistakes in exploring shouldn't be punished so severely. It hinders exploration in that it wastes time with needless deaths. Thankfully, Team Cherry seems to agree, and they've already made some tweaks so that some hazards no longer deal 2 masks of damage. I would take this a step further though, and apply that to tiny random enemies as well, like these guys. I don't think the intended experience would change from this. These little guys are still obstacles and still need to be kept in mind, but I just think they shouldn't be as impactful. Other than that though, I don't think anything should change. All of the bosses feel very carefully designed, usually, so the double damage default is something I've accepted. I had considered whether bosses should stop dealing contact damage while staggered, but I don't think that this would alleviate as much frustration as one would think. Stagger windows are generally pretty short, and I imagine that there would be some frustration when the hitbox comes back online while Hornet is on top of the boss. So I don't think the benefit of disabling contact damage while staggered would have that big of an impact. Okay, those 2 things are the general game-wide changes I'd make. Now I want to talk about one of the most complained about sections of the game, the Last Judge runback. This runback has a reputation already for being incredibly bad, and yeah, it's pretty bad. I wouldn't argue with that. I think the only reason it's so bad though is because you can't just run past all of the enemies. Not easily anyway. Because of this, you can't develop or rely on muscle memory as much, and you have to spend some time to carefully maneuver around one enemy type in particular. This guy, the Driznit, and specifically the one right by the room entrance. This guy just kinda sucks in general, but I want to leave the design alone. It feels too heavy-handed to me to change the movement or attack pattern just to make one run back easier. Instead, I think this whole last judge issue would be fixed if you could easily run past these guys, and I don't think this would be that hard to do either. If I were Team Cherry, I would have them take, say, half a second longer to aggro. Really not that much time at all, but enough time so that their hitbox can be avoided entirely while sprinting past. This doesn't really change the flow of exploration at all, or how to fight them, but it's subtle enough to where I think it would make the run back feel significantly more reasonable. Speaking of making things more reasonable, let's talk about the High Halls arena. Oh man, this arena was my bottleneck. In my opinion, this arena is too hard for being required to beat the game. Honestly, it had me questioning whether I would beat the game. In fact, it's almost the only part of the game I had to use a cheese strat to beat it. Almost. So, what would I change? Well, before changing anything, I want to highlight one of the design philosophies that Team Cherry likely used while designing Farloom as a whole, but especially likely through these tough skill checks. I've already touched on this a little bit, but here it is again. Exploration is rewarded. If something is too hard, do some exploring and come back later, with more upgrades. So with that in mind, this arena might be okay as is, but I personally would make one small tweak. The only wave that felt more or less unfair to me was the last one. In the last wave, I think instead of 2 choir clappers, have 2 choristers followed by 1 choir clapper soon after. This still feels climactic, still doesn't have flying enemies, and is still challenging, just maybe slightly more reasonable. I'm not convinced that this would fix much, and also not convinced that the earlier waves are fine as they are, but it's fun to think about. Okay, before we get to the part we've all been waiting for, I'd like to show some positivity and talk about some design choices that I liked a lot while playing Silksong. First, I like the cocoon replacing the shade. It's a good choice to me because the game is genuinely much harder than its predecessor, and most places where you're likely to die while exploring already have plenty of things trying to kill you, so having a little help with a near full silk refill instead of an additional enemy plays very nicely with Farloom's finely tuned level design. Second, I like the Silk Eaters much more than the Rancid Eggs in Hollow Knight. They're kind of the same thing, currencies for retrieving your lost stuff, but the difference is that Silk Eaters have a much lower barrier to using them, and it is much clearer what they do, so they are much more likely to be used. Personally, I've never used a Rancid Egg, but I've used several Silk Eaters during a playthrough of Silksong. I wouldn't be surprised if Team Cherry noticed that Rancid Eggs weren't used much, and decided to make this change. Lastly, I have a bit of a spicy take. I actually like the rosary economy in Silksong. I like how the game makes you feel broke most of the time, while at the same time giving you plenty of options for having your rosaries stored in safer places, like necklaces. I also like that it keeps things generally costing the same across the whole game. It's a nice contrast from the original Hollow Knight, where the prices of things were all over the place and went up and up as you went farther along in the game. In Silksong though, things costing less than 100 are pretty affordable, things costing around 300 are affordable but take a little saving up, and things that are 500 or more are definitely things worth saving up for. And this is pretty consistent across the whole game, which I found really impressive. I will concede though that this might be a bit of an overcorrection on Team Cherry's part, where the rosary economy balancing might be too on the broke side. I originally had a part of this video talking about some ways to fix this, but I wasn't too confident with my ideas, so I left that out. Alright, now onto the main event, Bilewater. This one's a doozy. This was my least favorite area of the game, in terms of level design. It just feels like there's one too many things to make the whole region feel unfair. The Steelkins are hard to hit and spawn randomly, the basic enemies explode, the platforming is very punishing, and the muck maggots. Good lord, the muck maggots. Even so, I do respect Team Cherry's vision, and I want to preserve it as much as possible. This is why it was such a challenge to think of any genuinely small improvements to Bilewater. This whole area is technically optional after all, so all of the ideas I would come up with felt like too much. Like, one idea was to move the Wreath of Purity to the bottom of Bilewater instead of in putrefied ducts, or having the muck maggots proc after a short window instead of instantly, similar to how the floor hazards work in deep docks. But both of these felt too heavy-handed to me. Bilewater, by design, is a, quote, come back later region. Come back with more movement upgrades, more spool extenders, more masks, and yes, the Wreath of Purity. Exploration is rewarded, and I think that Team Cherry intended for the region not even to be found or explored until after the Silken Soul quest had been accepted, which is very late in Act 2. But something has to give. Intention doesn't always translate to design. So if I had to do a single tiny change, I would add some indications that the Silken do not want intruders. Add 1 or 2 signs somewhere in lower Bilewater, indicating that the region itself will be very hostile in a diegetic way. The region does have lots of traps, which I can see as being attempts at this, but personally, I didn't connect the dots until I was well into the region. I'd add a sign with some warning text, or maybe a defaced town signpost, or some Citadel bug corpses hung up. Just something to be a little more clear about the challenge ahead. If I could get away with one other change though, I think I would do something to make the bench in upper Bilewater easier to find. Maybe move the arrows on the bench sign so they point towards it instead of the broken bench, and add 1 more sign in the room where you break the wall to find it. This would both reward intentional exploration and give more indication that the broken bench is, well, broken. It might not entirely fit with the lore, but I think that could be fixed with the Silken having defaced the Citadel bench signs, while the new sign in a style more appropriate to the region. Now for the man himself, Groll the Great. Honestly, even though I cheesed him, I think Groll as a boss isn't that bad. I think the issue, again, is more the design around him. Making the nearby bench easier to find helps, but I think we can help make the boss arena itself a little nicer too. First, here's a quick refresher of the arena, pulled from the Hollow Knight wiki. There's 2 Silken, 2 Silken Trappers, followed by a Spikeball Trap, 3 Swamp Squits, 1 Silken and 1 Silken Trapper, followed by 2 swings of a Spikeball Trap, and finally 1 Silken Trapper and 2 Swamp Squits. I think this is a bit much, and the number of waves should be shrunk a bit. Namely, remove waves 3 and 5 entirely. I personally found it strange that the squits were part of this arena at all, so removing them would make the arena shorter, and also feel more lore appropriate to me. So, my final version of the pre-Groll arena would be 2 Silken, 2 Silken Trappers, followed by a Spikeball Trap, and 1 Silken and 1 Silken Trapper, followed by 2 swings of a Spikeball Trap. Again, it's not much, but I think this would help cut down on the unfair feeling that surrounds Groll as a boss. Hopefully, this would make the whole experience just a little smoother. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Those are some tiny changes I'd make to Silksong to make the whole experience just a little smoother. I want to reiterate though that I'm not a game designer and nowhere near professional in the game dev space. This whole video has been a thought exercise for fun and to think about game design as an art form. I hope this has been as thought-provoking for you as much as it has been for me. And again, please let me know if you agree or disagree with any of these ideas, or if you have any ideas of your own.